Well, hello and welcome to Love versus Hate. My name is Anne, and I'm your old-fashioned nerd.
And I'm Emily, your mainstream millennial.
And on this podcast, Emily and I like to debate and argue about the things in life that we love and hate.
And I would like to debate and argue about how you started this episode. It was not normal, Anne.
Every time I don't start it normally, you make some kind of comment about it.
Yeah, because it's weird and unsettling.
I guess I have to do it same every single time. You just set
the tone for the rest of this episode.
With my hello.
Yeah, how dare you?
I try to make it different, because otherwise it's the same thing over and over and over. I'm trying to make it different.
It's a trademark intro, you know? When you watch a TV show, they don't change up the intro.
Then why don't we just have the same recording and not... Because, a spoiler alert for all our listeners, every single episode we, redo the intro. We don't just take a recording and then...
We aren't lazy.
Actually, I wonder if... Because it'd be hard to, just jump in without something to
Yeah, somebody did ask me if we actually said our intro every time, and I'm like, yes.
Yes. But I guess I say it so similarly that the small, subtle differences I make. Anyway, okay, we're moving on.
This episode isn't about that.
It's not. It's about something I love, and I'm so excited to talk about it. And technically, we've already talked about it on the podcast, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth, and we're talking about D&D. Dungeons and Dragons.
I literally had to text Anne because I was making a social post about our episode, and I was like, Anne, is D&D D-N-D or D and D?
It's technically D and D, but if you're typing it up fast, or if you were to Google D-N-D, they're kind of interchangeable.
It still shows up, yeah. Google told me that they're both correct, but the D and D. Yeah, it's officially and D.
Yeah, what's the name for that symbol? The and symbol?
The and sign.
Is that... No, it's got a name. It's
Anthropolis.
You just made that up. I had to think about it. I'm like, yeah, she made that up. But anyway.
I made it believable, though. She believed me for a second.
Yes, a millisecond. And then I was like, Tropolis. It's like a city.
Yes, Anthropolis. It's Ann City.
Let's go there.
Wow. Okay, once again, we are not talking about Anthropolis.
Oh, we're talking about D&D, and I'm so excited. Like I said, we did go over kind of this general topic in a previous episode, and we actually played with one of our friends, Dutch Marigold. Shout out to you, Quincy. But this episode, I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth into kind of the history and pop culture and why it's so popular today.
Can't wait, because we all know how much I love history.
Yeah, not quite your thing. But you've enjoyed when we've played D&D. You've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. Have I played it outside of those times?
Once,
with also the same people, right?
Yeah, it was you, me, and Quincy again. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And it was epic. It was so good.
I love how I had to ask. I was like, who did I play with?
We know your memory's not the best. But it was just a quick shout out. It was so epic because Quincy looped it, and it was epic. It was so fun. Anyway, okay, so D&D. The main reason I wanted to talk about it is I am obsessed, of course, but also it's become really popular. It's definitely taken off, especially in the last kind of decade, but really just kind of more so today. And I think part of that is a little bit with the pandemic. I think people everywhere started looking for new hobbies. And I know for me, that's kind of when I started. It was kind of right before the pandemic I started playing. And so it just kind of, I think that was part of one of the reasons why it's gotten popular. But even before that, it's been popular. So let's kind of dive into it a little bit. You ready to learn?
Can't wait.
I know. So D&D was first created by Gary Gygax in 1977.
What a name.
I know, isn't that just it's memorable. Maybe Emily will actually remember it. Gary Gygax.
Gary Gygax. Ask me at the end of the episode, see if I remember.
Oh, good idea. Okay, I will.
Oh, great. Let me say it one more time. Gary Gygax.
Gary Gygax. I'll mention his name a couple more times here in this history. So he launched Dungeons and Dragons, specifically with the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That was the first sort of official book. And he was a game creator. He had created war games with miniatures. And so he was sort of in this realm of role play and sort of maps and miniatures. So he already was...
Miniatures.
Miniatures are small figurines.
Oh, so it's actually in person. It's not a computer game?
Yeah, they're physical.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. And so he was always kind of interested in that style of game. And so it kind of naturally, he ended up coming up with a game called Chainmail. I've never played it. It's more of a war game where you have like maps. And you play like literally it's kind of like Risk, but on a much grander scale where you actually have armies that you're like moving around and you fight and battle. I've never played those kind of games, but I've heard stories. So
Okay.
so anyway, he launched D&D, and also, fun fact, he lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Famous.
Super famous. We should go, Emily, because you can actually go to his house. They've turned it into a museum.
And we literally went to Lake Geneva together.
I know, and we didn't go see his house, so we gotta go again, and we gotta go check out his house.
All right, all in favor of Love vs. Hate podcast field trip.
Hi!
Okay, we're going.
Yay! We'll take pictures.
We'll vlog it.
We'll vlog it. And so, like I said, he launched the game in 1977. He ended up also founding TSR, which was his own gaming company, which was eventually in 1997, so many years later, bought by Wizards of the Coast. And so Wizards of the Coast is who owns D&D now. And so you'll probably hear that name if you do any kind of Googling. Wizards of the Coast is like they are in charge of D&D now.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the general history. I mean, D&D has like its own realm called the Forgotten Realms. And so when you play D&D, if you're playing like traditional classic, you're playing in the Forgotten Realms. And that was actually something that, again, Gary sort of helped establish and help build, and Wizards of the Coast has only expanded like just a ton upon it. And there is so much history in Forgotten Realms. Like they have literally spent decades developing this world, and there's a lot of different rules, there's a lot of different history, lore. It's honestly like they have novels that are just these adventures that happen in the Forgotten Realms. And so if you wanted to just learn about the world, like you don't even have to play the game, and you could just kind of dive into the lore of it, which I think is kind of unique and fun too.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a time, obviously, people probably know, where kind of in the 80s, right when the game was first sort of launching, there were a lot of people that thought it was bad, that it was like witchcraft, that it was negative and, causing kids to like, cast these weird spells. And like, it's just, there was all this like negativity around it. And I always feel kind of bad because it got a bad rap, like kind of early.
Yeah.
But interestingly, even though like broadly speaking, it had a bad rap, there were still a lot of people playing it. Because the people who played it knew that it wasn't what people claimed it was. And so it kind of had this weird, like, underground where people would play it sort of like, if you were playing D&D, you were such a mega nerd that you wouldn't tell a single soul. So it kind of had this weird, like, a bunch of people were playing it, but nobody knew about it, and nobody would say. And so it's kind of this weird kind of underground game that was, like, happening. And so I think, just kind of going and doing this research, to me, what's one of the things that really sort of helped D&D, honestly, was kind of people forgot about it. Like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was seen as such this kind of negative thing, but kind of in the early 2000s, it kind of just got forgotten about a little bit. And that's right when Wizards of the Coast kind of took over, and they took time to sort of make new versions of the game. And so they came out with, in early 2000, like right when they procured the game, they came out with 3rd edition. And once 3rd edition came out, they eventually, only a few years later, that was in 2000, 2007, 2008, they launched 4th edition. And then by 2014, they launched 5th edition. And really, when they launched 5th edition, they were very intentional about how do we take this kind of complex, kind of, very involved game, and how do we bring new players on? Like, how do we simplify this? And so with the launch of 5th edition, I think that was one of the biggest pushes that really just launched the game and really helped get people into it. And what's made it so popular now is their change with 5th edition. They made the rules a little bit more simpler. They added some interesting spells and some interesting actions that you can do that just makes the game a little bit more exciting and just a little bit more accessible to new players. And interestingly, right around this same time, they launched 5th edition, and then another really big thing happens. Critical Role, which
I've heard of.
Have you heard of? Good job, Emily. What's Critical Role?
I think it's like a group of people that just started playing, and they recorded it.
Yeah.
And then they uploaded it
Yep.
to YouTube, or is it just a podcast? I don't know.
So, pretty good, Emily. I'm
Thank
impressed.
you.
Knowing your memory.
And Gary Gygax.
Good job. So proud.
I had to say it one more time so I didn't forget it.
We'll see. We'll see by the end. Critical Role. So Critical Role is a D&D like streaming. They started on like they launched on Twitch. They're on YouTube as well, but they're like they have their own animated series now. They have a lot of charities that they support. They have a podcast. They're like their own.
Wait, is Critical Role the one that was like, oh, we need to
They
start
did their
this...
Kickstart? Yes.
The thing that I got so mad about,
Yeah,
because
I
I
don't
was
know
like,
why
do they need this money? That is ridiculous. Think of how many people could be fed.
Literally every single episode you watch their live, and one of the, like during their announcements they're talking about the different charities that they have going on. They help so many people. Anyway, we won't get into it, but
It's
yes,
fine.
they launched a Kickstarter. I think to this day it's still the largest. They got over $11 million to put together this animated series, which is out on Amazon Prime. Highly recommend. You can go watch it right now.
Also, sorry if you can hear like a buzzing noise in the background. I think somebody's mowing their lawn outside. How rude of them.
How rude.
To
We're
interrupt.
recording a podcast.
Anyways.
This is professional. Anyway, Critical Role, they launched in 2015, and they're a group of voice actors, and they're all just really good friends. They've been friends for a long time, and actually, it's kind of funny, they all sort of knew each other, just being kind of in the voice acting business, but they weren't necessarily friends. But one day, for one of their birthdays, for Liam's birthday, they were like, hey, you play D&D, like, you know, and Matt was known for being a dungeon master, and he was like, hey, would you put together a game for my friends and for, like, my birthday? And so they kind of all came together, and then that's history.
And
like,
then they never stopped.
they never stopped. They had such a blast playing with each other, and now they literally do it for a living. And it's just like, I wish that would be my dream job, is to like play D&D for a living. But anyway, so Critical Role launched. They actually too, they started their campaign in Pathfinder, but ended up switching to 5th edition. So again, like 5th edition is kind of, we're hearing about it. Critical Role is playing in 5th edition. And again, it's like, I think it's getting people excited to kind of like try this out. And for me, like I watched Critical Role before I ever played the game, and you do get a good sense of, oh, this is kind of how it goes. Okay. And you kind of get a sense, because it can feel daunting when you first start. So actually seeing other people play, you kind of get a sense of it, and you kind of get motivation to give it a try.
My question is, like, a lot of D&D is like up to the player's imagination. And also I know just from what you've told me about being a dungeon master is you get to make the world, you're creating your own maps, you're creating rules or whatever.
Want, yeah, you can homebrew. That's what I do.
Okay. Okay. So if you homebrew, are you not playing what's the new season 5 or whatever?
5th edition.
5th edition.
Well, so the interesting thing about how Dungeons and Dragons, and really any role-playing game, so 5th edition, it's basically new rules. They incorporate new spells, like they add basically to the game. But really at its core, if you're playing like the traditional Dungeons and Dragons, you're in the Forgotten Realms. That's their world. You're playing as like wizards and sorcerers, and you're playing in this fantasy world of the Forgotten Realms. But you do not have to.
So in all the ones that we did, I wasn't playing in the Forgotten Realm?
Probably not, no. We were playing, like, the one we did that we did not record, we were playing, like, in modern times.
Yeah.
And that is very encouraged. Like, you just kind of take the rules of D&D, you take the rules of 5th edition, and you apply it to whatever world you want to create. And so you do not have to play in Forgotten Realms at all. But you absolutely can if you want to. Because, like I said, there's a lot of history are kind of already built in. And there's a lot of maps. And there's campaigns that are already pre-made that you can just play through. So if you want kind of something to ease you into it a little bit, and you don't want to have to do too much of your own writing, there's tons of resources online and books to where you literally just kind of play it out.
Okay.
Which I do recommend. For me, though, one of the joys that I've always loved about the game is writing my own world and coming up with my own storylines and coming up with my own, like, I've really enjoyed the homebrew process. So for me as a DM, that's the way I actually prefer to play. I like doing it my way.
Yeah. When I used to work with Anne, she would like every week be like, oh, you want to see my map? Look at this map I made. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you spend your free time on that?
Yes. You want to hear how I almost total party killed my players. Almost. Didn't
Does
quite.
that
One of
mean?
them made it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what that
TPK.
means.
Yeah, TPK. Total Party Kill.
Oh, yeah.
Almost.
Total party kill? TPK? Yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah. It almost happened. I almost killed all of my players except one. One survived. It was honestly one of my like favorite moments playing because it was so epic. But yeah, so Critical Role, huge influence. Also, The Adventure Zone, which is a podcast that the McElroy brothers do, and we know how much I love the McElroys.
The McElroys.
Ugh.
Haven't heard about them in quite some time.
It's McElroy. That's one of
Mm.
Emily's little bits that she likes to do. It makes me mad. But the Adventure Zone, interestingly, is actually how I got into D&D. So my brother, I've always known of it. My brothers told me some of it, and I knew that he liked Critical Role, and I had heard of it, but I just had never really gotten into it. And I was Christmas shopping for my brother, and I saw a graphic novel, and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like a D&D, because on the cover there's like a, D20, a 20-sided dice. And I'm like, this looks like a D&D thing. And I like read the cover and I read like the back. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a podcast that they turned into a graphic novel. This is so cool. I bet my brother would love this. So I bought it for him for Christmas, ended up reading it myself. I did give it to him as a present as well. But read it myself first. And then I got hooked and I listened to the podcast. And that's how I got into D&D. And I've become
The rest
obsessed.
is history.
The rest is history. So The Adventure Zone, again, they came out in 2014, so even a little bit before Critical Role, but they were just a podcast, so it was a little bit different. And they play the game a little bit differently because it's podcast format, so they're a little more loose with the rules. But so good. Highly recommend listening to the Balance Arc. I cried at the end. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful story. Oh, it's so good. Anyway.
Okay.
Also, Dimension 20.
Is that a Critical Role thing that you listen to? Or what
It was
is it
the
called?
Adventure Zone.
Adventure Zone. Okay, got it.
I've also cried watching Critical Role.
Wow.
I have a lot of emotions when I'm watching these things.
Looks
Also,
like she
Dimension
might cry
20.
now.
I know. Wiping tears as we speak. Also, Dimension 20, which is also very popular with Brennan Lee Mulligan, there's kind of like a set of like DMs that you want to watch, and Brennan Lee Mulligan is definitely one of them. He's hilarious. He always comes up with fantastic characters. He's really good at improv. Like, he's one of the best for sure. Matthew Mercer and Brennan Lee Mulligan, like, they are my top two like favorite DMs. They're so good.
Are they in something specific?
So Dimension 20 is what Brennan Lee Mulligan runs. So that's like his own. It's not as popular as Critical Role, and it came later. It was in 2018. So it's a little bit more new. And it's actually weirdly produced by College Humor, which always surprises me for some reason. I'm like, what's College Humor doing with... I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, but whatever.
I don't even know what you're talking about. You're speaking a different language to me right now.
That's fine. So hopefully some of our listeners are keeping up with me. I don't know. We'll find out. Maybe this will be like one of those episodes where all the millennials are like, never listen to this one. It's so boring. And I'm like, wait, but I want you to learn.
But it's fun. Well, then tell us where do you find these things to listen to? Like, I have no idea what College Humor is. Is that a channel?
YouTube.
Like, oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Dimension 20, YouTube.
I'm like, is it a Twitch thing? Is it a podcast?
I mean, all of them you can find on podcast form, but specifically, The Adventure Zone is only a podcast, but then Critical Role and Dimension 20 you can find on YouTube. I don't think Dimension 20 does Twitch or like live stream. I think they're only YouTube, but Critical Role live streams every Thursday. It's Thursday night.
Oh my gosh.
Critters come join
Wow.
us. It's time to
How
get
could you
in
watch
the
It's literally
night.
Thursday night right now. Are you missing them right now?
Oh no, they start later. They don't start until like 9 p.m. my time. I usually, if I'm,
Oh,
this is like my schedule.
Okay. I know. Okay. Last time we recorded on a Thursday, Anne was like, I have to leave at this time. And I was like, that's a random specific time.
gotta
Now I know.
They're in campaign 3 and it's been so good.
I'm going to make her stay until
No.
9:15.
Well, I'll just watch the release on Monday. I can't make it like usually full through. So what I usually do is they always do like a 10-minute break because they're like 4 hours. Like it's a 4-hour stream usually. Sometimes it's longer than that. So I'll usually watch like up until about 11 and then they take a break and then they'll come back. So I usually watch up until the break and then I go to bed and then on Monday I finish the episode like once they release the...
We love a girl who knows her schedule.
Yes. I have to. Otherwise, because if you fall behind, it's hard to get back caught up because they're 4-hour episodes.
Yeah, that's true.
But the nice thing is when you're not watching live is you can double time it.
Yeah.
So then it doesn't take
We love.
We love. But there is something fun about watching it live and knowing like, oh my gosh, like that just happened. Anyway. So, why, that's kind of the history, and I'm talking a little bit about, like Critical Role, Adventure Zone. Like, that's, I think, part of why it's gotten popular. But I think what really launched it into sort of that mainstream
Dun
is
dun dun.
all of the references in pop culture. Because there are so many, and they just keep growing.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the earliest references is actually in E.T. There's a scene where you can see Elliot and his brother and his friends are playing in kind of the background. Also, of course, Pixar's Onward, that just came out recently, but that was like a full-length movie. It was literally just D&D. Like, they didn't name it that.
Really?
It had another name. Have you seen Onward? Pixar's
Yeah.
Onward? It's
I guess
literally... It's a campaign.
remember.
They have a quest, and they talk about, remember the brother? Yeah. He's like, Guinevere, and like, it's literally D&D. It's fantasy D&D, and it's amazing. And I was so happy to see it, because I was like, yes. Also, it was the last movie I saw before the pandemic. It's the last movie I saw in theaters for like a year and a half.
Wow.
So good.
Never forget.
Of course, TV shows, there's references everywhere. Community, there's a whole episode, and it's one of their best, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, where the entire episode is them playing a game of D&D. So good. Freaks and Geeks, James Franco.
Ooh.
You know him. He plays a character in Freaks and Geeks called Daniel, and he's like one of the cool kids, right? Like, he's one of the mega cool kids. But he kind of gets stuck with like the geeks in the AV club for a night, and they want to play D&D, and he's like, well, I'll try it. Like, just let me try it. And they're like, you're going to hate it. And they're like, no, let me try it. So he ends up playing, and of course he falls in love with it, and it's really funny.
That sounds like a fun episode.
It's really funny. It's so great, because by the end, there's like a moment where he's like, wait, I'm a dwarf, so I'm small. And they're like, yeah. And he's like, I could fit through that thing. And like, he's probably, and they're all like, oh, yeah, oh my God. And like, he gets so into it, and it's great. Obviously, like shows like The Simpsons, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Gravity Falls, The IT Crowd, The Big Bang Theory. Like, there's a moment where Will Wheaton comes on, and he invites like the Big Bang crowd to come and play. And Will Wheaton is a huge D&D guy. I mean, everything about Will Wheaton I love. He's like one of my favorite people. And of course, the big one that I haven't named yet.
Riverdale.
No.
I knew you were going to say Stranger Things, but I wanted to say Riverdale also.
Stranger Things. So season 1 came out in July of 2016. And keep in mind, again, 5th edition, it kind of got broad released in 2014. They started sort of developing it like early in kind of like 2012, 2014. And we've got Critical Role in 2015, The Adventure Zone in 2014. So like kind of these early teens, it's starting to kind of kick off a little bit. And then Stranger Things hits in 2016. And people just go crazy. I mean, it's a phenomenal show. It's one of my favorites. It's really good. And it kind of hits that mainstream. And the show, not only in the opening scene are they like playing Dungeons and Dragons, but then even the whole kind of context of their world gets described through a D&D lens. Because even Dustin, like when they're trying to describe like what they're experiencing, he's like, it's just like the Demogorgon in our game, like, or it's like the Upside Down. Like they end up describing their own world in D&D terms. And so the whole show is really inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, and I love it. And so that really, when Stranger Things kind of came out, I think that was kind of the last sort of tipping block for the game to really start taking off and get popular. Because more recently, in Marvel shows like Loki, there's a LARP scene where, and LARP is a little bit different from D&D, but it's basically taking that concept of let's have a party, let's go out and, do quests and conquer missions and have, do battles and stuff like that, and taking it and applying it to live action. So live action roleplay is what LARP is. And so there's a scene in Loki where like he goes back in time and he ends up at this LARP event in Wisconsin and he has to like find himself. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Wisconsin. I got so excited. Whenever something is in Wisconsin, I just get excited because that's where Emily and I live. Anyway, because that wasn't clear.
We just really like Wisconsin. We're actually from Texas, though.
But Wisconsin's cool, I guess. Anyway, and then, of course, if you've watched Hawkeye, like he makes friends with people who LARP, and they are literally in multiple episodes. And like in one of the last episodes, like they're kind of the heroes because they're trying to like control this crowd. And then they're like, we can't do it without our costumes and our gear. And so they go out and they like get their gear on, and then they can like, control the crowd. And it's like this awesome moment. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is like, it's literally like they're highlighting it in Marvel. And so it's becoming very popular. There's also, if you didn't know, Emily, there's a movie that is coming out in 2023
What?
called Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. And it's starring, like, Chris Pine. Like, it's big names.
Chris Pine?
Chris
From
Pine.
The Princess Diaries 2? The Royal Engagement?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what it's called. I think it is, though.
I think it is that. But Michelle Rodriguez, Simon from Bridgerton is in it. Hugh Grant, like, big names are going to be in this movie. And I will say, I'm calling it now, I have mixed feelings about this. Because I really want it to be good, but I have a feeling it might be bad. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know. I have to see it before I can make any kind of call, but I'm, like, nervous because I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be good or not.
So is it like you're actually in the world, or is it just you're watching people play?
No, it's taking place in the world. Like, Chris Pine
in the Forgotten Realm or whatever?
Yes. So it's in the Forgotten Realms world. Chris Pine is literally playing a bard, and, like, that's their roles. Like, if you look up on IMDb for the movie, it's like Chris Pine, the bard, Michelle Rodriguez, the barbarian. Like, they literally are playing, like, the druid, the rogue.
Oh.
They're playing those roles. So
Wow. That'll be interesting.
I know. I don't know how I feel about it, but we'll see.
No trailers yet?
No, there's a trailer. You can go watch
is?
the trailer. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Well, we can watch it after this, and you can let me know what you think. I think I think it could be good. I have hope. But like I said, I'm like I have hope, but I'm not getting my hopes up. If that makes sense.
She has some hope, but not a lot.
But not a lot. So anyway, it's taken off. It's becoming, honestly, it's like kind of becoming a mainstream thing. So, like, you could call me a mainstream nerd.
You see, I think that... Do you want to be called a mainstream
nerd?
No,
okay. I don't like it.
I think the thing here that might make you feel a little better is, yes, a lot more people know about Dungeons and Dragons, but the amount of people who've actually played it or are interested in playing it is probably not as much as the people who know about it.
That might, yeah.
Because, like, think of all the people who watch Stranger Things.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people. Have you met anybody who likes Stranger Things, who's not a nerd like you, who has played Dungeons and Dragons? Because the people who I've spoken with at my work have seen Stranger Things. They love Stranger Things. And then I asked them if they play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're like, no, not for me. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
It's actually kind of fun, but...
Yeah. It is. And that's the thing that I think that is unfortunate, because I do think, while it's certainly changing, and while I think you hear more positive things about the game than negative these days, there is still a negative connotation that comes with it. There's still kind of this older generation of people in kind of like their 40s and older who they're like, they hear it and they're like, isn't that the game that's like really bad and like is really does evil things?
And I think, like, I don't know, I guess I don't really talk to like older generations about Dungeons and Dragons, but like even just the our generation, I don't know, are we young still? Yeah. Relatively, it depends on who you're asking. The negative connotation is that it's nerdy.
Yeah. Which, again, nerdy is honestly becoming more of a mainstream thing. It is.
Yeah, but I think more so in terms of, like, the things that you can watch, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Like, it's so much easier to just watch Stranger Things than to, like, play D&D for 4 hours.
It is a long game.
Yeah, it takes a lot.
But honestly,
I would know.
You have played.
I've only played for 1 hour.
Well, you played, the second time we played, I think it was like 3.
Wow, yeah. Time really flies, though, when you're playing it.
You don't notice it. I know. Yeah. And I can't, I am a huge advocate for the game. I would highly recommend it to anyone of any age. I even played it once with a 6 and 7-year-old, and it was great. And we played for 2 hours, and like you can't keep a 6 and 7-year-old's attention for more than an hour. And we played for 2, and I had to put them to bed, and I was like, we have to stop because you have to go to bed. And they're like, no, we want to keep playing, just a little bit more, please. And I was like, no, it's your bedtime. But like that just goes to show, like it's a very engaging game. Yeah. Once you get invested, you're in it, and you don't, like you said, you don't really notice the time going by, and you're problem solving, you're creative thinking, you're improvising. There's so much like kind of fun that happens that you just don't get in any other game. Mm-hmm. And it's just it's a whole new experience too, because you don't have any kind of limit, really. Like, it's just the door of possibilities is so vast that's one of the things I love about it, because like I will sit down with my players and in my mind I'm like, okay, I have this session sort of planned, I have kind of this thing of how I kind of expect these things to go, maybe they'll go in this direction, like I kind of have a set a little bit in my mind. It never goes that way.
Yeah.
Because my players bring such interesting twists and turns and that I just can't anticipate, and that's what makes it so much more fun, because they just get into all these shenanigans and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did this come into being? And like, there's so much laughter and like camaraderie and friendship, and it's just, you're creating this story together, and it just makes it so fun.
Aw, nice.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It can be a challenging game for sure, and it's certainly, you need the right group of people. Like, you can get into situations where it's not fun if you're not with the right group of people, or sometimes there's different ways you can play the game. For me, I am much more driven by the narrative and the story. Like, my games are usually kind of 60% more story driven and only like 40% more battle and like kind of fight. So like we usually will probably do maybe 2 sessions that are more story and then have like a battle scene, you know, or sometimes we might even have like 3 to 4 sessions that are kind of story heavy and then a battle. So I tend to be more story driven, where I know for some players, like they're in it for the dungeon crawl. Like they want to go in and kind of like optimize their characters and go into the dungeon and kind of like, okay, can I conquer this, you know, with my skills? And they like that challenge of it. So you need to know what kind of game you're getting into, and so that you know if that's going to be a game that you like want to participate in. And you also need to know the kind of players, and because again, players sometimes have different agendas. Like I've played with people who really are just in it for the battle, and like they work really hard to get like the best gear and the best weapons, and they want to like optimize their characters so that they're the most powerful, and they're not necessarily into the story as much. So I'm like, okay, like I probably wouldn't play with you necessarily as much. Maybe for like a one shot or something, but probably not a campaign, because we just have different kind of goals that we're looking for within the game.
Yeah.
But the game allows for that. Like you can choose, which is one of the things I love.
Yeah.
Or there's even people like they're in it and like they want to build an empire. They're like, okay, I want to get into this, and like I want to build up a town and then make it into a city, and like, you know, they kind of have these sort of goals in mind, and like so you can design a game kind of around that, where like maybe you're just kind of, you know, gathering assets to then build up a ship or a town or a mansion, or, you know, like there's so many different ways you can play the game.
Nice.
So, Emily, to wrap us up, what is your life lesson about Dungeons and Dragons? There's so many.
My life lesson is get a small group of people together, and hopefully you know somebody who already knows how to play, so that they can help guide you through your first
that
time
helps
playing.
a lot. It helps a lot.
Yeah. Because the first time I played, I was like, what's going on? Like,
It's
it was fun,
confusing.
but like, yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, what does this number mean? What?
Wait, what?
But
I'm
it was
adding
fun.
what number to what?
But also just like, I would just start with the one shot just to dip your foot in the water, get a little wet. That was weird.
That was weird. I wasn't going to say anything, but since you pointed it out, that was weird.
And also to just like give it a try. If you've never played, don't just be like, ew, it's nerdy, gross.
Yeah, because that's exactly how you were going to react. Gross.
I call that my wavy voice effect. And just try it. Give it a shot. Give it a one shot, you know? See what I did there?
I saw what you did there. You're so good.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would basically kind of echo that and just kind of say, if you are trying the game for the first time and maybe you have a group of friends and none of you've played before, there are a lot of rules and you can feel overwhelmed by them. You don't have to do all of them. Like, you can simplify the game. There's a lot, like, look online. Literally, like, when I played with the 6 and 7-year-old, I majorly simplified the game in order to make it, you know, digestible for them. Because if I were to play it traditionally, we would have never gotten anywhere. So, like, find a version that maybe is a little easier for you to kind of start with. Like, don't feel like you have to know everything. When I first started running a game, I did not know all the rules, and sometimes things came up, and I was like, you know what? Sorry guys, I don't really know how this works, but we're going to do this. And my players were like, okay, like you just kind of have to accept at times that you might not know the exact rules, but trust your dungeon master and just whatever they decide, kind of move forward with that. So don't let the rules and like the books, like sometimes it's like, I need to read that entire book in order to play. No, You don't need to. There's tons of YouTube videos that can help you get started, that simplify it for you. Just don't get bogged down in the rules. It's okay.
You can listen to our past Dungeons and Dragons episode to hear us play. It's my first time playing, so you can get like an inside look at how a one shot can be set up.
Exactly, because when when Quincy put that together, he like simplified the rules, and it was super fun. You don't have to get deep into the rules. So that's one thing I recommend. And then kind of as my like sort of caveat to that and like second sort of life lesson, when you play, the first time you play, no matter what, you're going to get to this wall where you're going to have this moment where you're like, this is silly. Like, this feels weird. This is silly. I'm being silly. And it's a weird feeling. It's new. And you can either kind of be like, you know what, that's okay. I don't care. Like, this is fun. And you can kind of dive into it and you just kind of accept and you go into the silliness mode and you just have a good time. Or you can say, nope, I'm out. Like, this is just too much for me and this is weird. And that's okay. And no matter which decision you make, it's totally fine. But I would just encourage you, like, when you get to that moment, like, try and just kind of dig a little bit deeper. Because if you just choose to be silly, everyone else is going to be silly with you. And that's where the fun really lies, is when you just, like, accept that this is silly and kind of weird. That's where it gets really fun.
Yeah.
So before I leave you, that was our life lessons. But before we go, Emily.
Gary Gygax.
Yay!
I was waiting. I said it in my head a couple times throughout the episode.
I'm so proud of you.